Welcome to Shore Talk. Shore Talk is designed to keep you better informed of what's going on here on Virginia's beautiful Eastern Shore. Now, here's Shore Talk.
Joining me on Shore Talk today, we have a candidate for the Republican nomination for one of our two U.S. Senate seats here in Virginia. We are joined on the line right now by Delegate Nick Freitas. Welcome, Nick. How you doing this afternoon, sir?
Doing well. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking some time. I know you've got a very busy schedule, but I just wanted to ask real quick, maybe if you wanted to go over, the plan was for you to be on the shore today, but that plan obviously went a little bit awry. So maybe you can explain to our listeners why you're not on the shore right now as originally planned.
Sure. No, it's unfortunate. I was supposed to catch there was a plane leaving to come pick me up in Culpeper and take me out the Eastern Shore today, because we had some other places in the evening we had to be, and unfortunately because of weather we weren't able to do it. So we're in the process right now of rescheduling, and we're going to reschedule this next time for me to drive. That way I can make sure I make it. But we should be there probably first week in June.
All right, great. So Nick is again a candidate for the Republican nomination for the Senate here in Virginia, and the winner of this primary will be taking on Senator Tim Kaine. Nick is a military veteran. He's currently employed by the military industry, the defense industry here in Virginia, and he and his wife Tina have 3 kids. So, Delegate Freitas, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and why you decided to run for this Senate seat.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I got married right out of high school. Tina and I have been married. We just celebrated our 19th wedding anniversary. And as you mentioned, we have 3 children. Our oldest daughter, Lily, is 15. Our son, Luke, is 12. And then our youngest daughter, Allie, is 10. I also joined the military right out of high school. I enlisted in the Army, served in the 82nd Airborne Division, the 25th Infantry. And then after 9/11, I volunteered to serve with Special Forces, which is better known in the Army, better known as Green Berets. And so I loved being a Green Beret, thought that's what I was going to do for my whole life. I ended up serving a couple combat tours over in Iraq, one in 2006 and one in 2008. And I have to say, there are not many jobs out there where a 25-year-old sergeant first class gets to roll around the countryside with his Iraqi scout platoon rolling up terrorists. But it was a great job, very rewarding. But when we got out of the military, started to get a little bit more involved in politics. I was concerned about the direction the country was going. I thought we were moving toward a much more government-centered vision of America, as opposed to one focused on individual liberty and free markets. And so I was asked to run for the House of Delegates, and I've just won re-election to that seat this year. I love serving in the House of Delegates, but I'll tell you, one of the most frustrating things is to try to get things done in Virginia and be constantly told that there's some sort of federal rule, federal regulation, federal barrier standing in the way of us being able to do what we need to do in Virginia. And so I think that's the next fight, is in Washington, D.C., and trying to get past some of this gridlock and ensure that we're allowing individuals, localities, and states to be able to do more for their own citizens without constantly running into federal obstructionism. So here I am in the U.S. Senate race, taking on Tim Kaine in the hopes of doing exactly that, returning a lot more power and choices back to individuals, states, and localities, as opposed to the federal government.
So if you would you maybe touch on what you think is either the biggest, and I know that sometimes various issues can be very close in nature, so I'll just leave it to your discretion to say either the biggest or maybe the top 3, whichever one you so decide to choose will be fine with me. But the biggest issue or issues facing us from a federal level right now, and your type of plan to try to alleviate or address these issues should you be elected.
Sure. I think, obviously one of the biggest ones that's always on everybody's mind is the economy, and ensuring that people can actually keep and maintain good jobs in Virginia. And I don't think Tim Kaine's approach to this is the appropriate one. Tim Kaine doesn't seem to find a tax increase or a regulation that he doesn't like. And It's unfortunate because if you look at people when they're trying to start a business, when they're trying to keep that business going, one of the biggest problems with either starting up or maintaining one's business is federal regulations. And it's the fact that these regulations come in and they end up contradicting state regulations or local regulations. A business owner cannot get a straight answer from various government agencies with respect to what they need to do to make sure that their business thrives. Same thing with tax policy. I think one of the greatest things the Trump administration has managed to do so far has to do with tax reform, because we're finding ourselves in a situation now for the first time in decades, really, where businesses are finding it far more cheaper and far more affordable to run their operations from the United States as opposed to picking up and moving 8,000 miles away to avoid some of those onerous taxes and regulations. So the fact that we've been able to roll those back is great. The problem is that right now a lot of that's been able to be done by executive order, so we have to enshrine that in legislation. And Tim Kaine has already indicated that he thinks we need more regulations, not fewer. He thinks we need more taxes, not fewer, and I think that's a real problem. I think national defense is another significant issue. Right now I'm the only candidate that's running for the United States Senate that is a combat veteran. I understand what our military personnel, our men and women, are dealing with in the current global war against terrorism and against extremism. And so to be able to speak to that and be able to provide the president with sound advice on the Senate side from someone that knows what it is to fight unconventional warfare, fight counterterrorism, fight within the counterinsurgency paradigms, I think is critical. That also helps when it comes to being able to speak to those issues that affect our veterans when they're separating from the military and reintegrate back into the economy. 10% of our 10% of our population in Virginia are military veterans. We have the largest concentration of veterans under the age of 40. We want to make sure that when they separate from the military, they're able to come into good jobs and they're not running into excess regulations that prevent those jobs from being a reality. We also have a lot of reform that we need to do within the VA. I think it's very frustrating to me that after the last 6 years, Tim Kaine has done little to nothing to do the sort of fundamental reform that we need to see in VA. It shouldn't just be adjusting things here and there. We need to do drastic changes that allow veterans to use the VA as a benefit, where they can go to whatever hospital they want as opposed to forcing them into government-run hospitals. And then I think when we look at issues like transportation, instead of the federal government determining where those transportation dollars go, I think the localities and states need a lot more say and what that looks like. And same thing with education reform. I think we need to move to a system where dollars are following students. I think in that sort of situation, you would see a lot more of what I've worked on in the Virginia General Assembly, which is more career technical education. It's more apprenticeship programs. For those students that want to go to college, that's great. We want to make that as easy as possible, but we also want to recognize that there's a lot of other great opportunities out there, career opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities that don't necessarily have a path that goes through college. And a lot of those students have been left behind or have been made to believe that their particular career path is not as good simply because it doesn't go through a four-year university. And so there's a lot of work to be done and a lot that we can do. And again, I've been really excited in the last 3 years in the General Assembly. I've managed to get a lot done there on these areas, and I'm looking forward to doing the same thing in the United States Senate.
All right. Well, it certainly is easy to point out areas where improvements can be made. Let me ask you, what are some of the areas that you think at a federal level that are being gotten correct at this point in time?
Well, I think that, again, and I would say thanks to this administration, we're actually starting to properly fund our military again. That has everything to do with, Second Fleet down in the Hampton Roads area. But it's more than that. It's also about making sure that our men and women are equipped with that training, with that and benefits, and with the equipment and materials that are going to allow them to be effective when they have to execute U.S. national security policy. I think we have also got a tenor within the federal government right now that says that, look, we're not the world's police force, but we do mean what we say. And if you're really interested in preserving peace, and I think we're starting to see that on the Korean Peninsula right now, that's very encouraging, where we want to have a program of engagement, not isolation, but our enemies and our allies alike both need to know that we mean what we say and we'll do what we say. And I don't think we had that for the last 8 years. I think we do have that under this administration. I know sometimes people aren't always happy with the way that the president says things or tweets things, but ultimately I think we need to judge things by the results. I think we need to give credit where credit is due. And the fact that the House, the Senate, and the executive branch have managed to reduce taxes, allow people to keep more of their own money, and roll back a lot of onerous and redundant regulations has been definitely steps in the right direction. The problem is Tim Kaine has opposed those things, and so that's why I think there are certain things the federal government is doing now that is great, but unfortunately Tim Kaine has not been a part of the solution on that. Same thing when it comes to important issues like immigration reform. And so I think Virginia deserves to be represented by someone that is going to continue to push forward on those issues that the federal government is doing well.
So how familiar are you with the Eastern Shore of Virginia here at Accomack in Northampton County?
Well, I mean, certainly familiar with respect to a lot of the history and the makeup and the geography of the island, but unfortunately, I just have not had the time to spend as much time over there as I would like. My daughters specifically, especially my youngest daughter, when she heard I was supposed to fly out today, she was desperate to come. She loves Chincoteague. So she is a pony girl, and she cannot wait to get out there. In fact, we're going to have to make a trip this summer to watch the pony swim. So she's very excited about that, and all of my kids definitely want to get out to the area.
Well, I certainly understand that you're a delegate from a different part of the state, and Virginia is a very large state geographically, and it's also a large state as far as how dynamic and diverse that it is. So the reason I asked that question is I didn't want to lead you in a direction that you might not be as familiar with as you might feel comfortable with. So maybe you could talk a little bit about some initiatives that you think might be worthwhile from a federal level to talk about maybe trying to reinvigorate the rural areas, because here on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, we are two of the smallest counties in Virginia. Northampton is the smallest, and I think Accomack is the third smallest. So maybe a little bit of what you think should be done at a federal level as far as reinvigorating and re-energizing some of our rural areas.
Well, I think when you look at a lot of rural areas, and I represent a rural area as well, although it's over on the Piedmont with Culpeper, Orange, and Madison. One of the things that we try to do is we try to make sure that we do have economic development going on, but we also like to try to maintain the rural aspect of our communities. And clearly, there's a large agricultural component within the Eastern Shore. And I think one of the things that we've got to do is make sure that we remove those barriers to localities being able to make decisions for themselves. There are so many issues that we run into now, whether it's the EPA involving themselves in our issues. And again, a lot of times when a property owner, when a farmer, when someone involved in agriculture or someone involved in agritourism is trying to get something done in order to, again, spur economic development while at the same time maintaining that rural culture, a lot of times one of the biggest barriers they run into is federal regulations. Whether it's some of the national historical sites, whether it has to do with the Environmental Protection Agency, and a lot of times it's not as if anyone is trying to get around the rules. They just want to properly understand what it is, and they want to be able to set up their business and get to compliance with regulations. And unfortunately, we do have a lot of regulators that their attitude is to obstruct. And so I think if we can remove those barriers out of the way, make it very easy, allow Virginia to make more decisions for itself, allow the Eastern Shore to make more decisions for itself. I don't think anybody is more invested in maintaining the environmental quality of the Eastern Shore than the people that live there. And so I don't think we need a lot of people coming down from Washington, D.C., telling us what that development should look like. So I don't want the federal government involved in trying to focus the development, but certainly when it comes to certain issues, I think especially with transportation, there is a role for the federal government to ensure that people have access to a region, that the products and whatnot that are sold from that region are able to get to the marketplace, and so that is certainly an appropriate role. I think the other thing that we need to look at, and this is something that unfortunately has become very politically driven, is when you look at things like sea level rise. There's a lot of people that want to say this is all due to man-made global warming. Well, look, I'm not as convinced that man-made global warming is the threat that many have made it out to be. But by the same token, when you are dealing with erosion, there is a proper role for the federal government to come in and assist with that. And so when we look at transportation dollars, when we look at dollars that are going to go to coastal areas, whether it's dredging, whether it's ensuring that we're preventing erosion, instead of the federal government coming in and dictating terms to localities, let's make localities, let's make states a partner in that process, and so that we're giving them a lot more control over how those dollars should be spent, so we're actually achieving a much better result instead of, again, somebody in in a bureaucratic building in Washington, D.C., thinking they know what's best when really they've never been to the area or properly understand the issues.
Well, and I hate to ask this question because sometimes I feel like the things that grab the headlines really don't matter as much at the end of the day as they might as far as people's everyday lives, but they seem to grab a lot of attention. I'm afraid I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to just comment on the recent rash of, not recent rash, but there was a school shooting over the weekend, and there seemed to have been a little bit of an uptick in some of these large-scale atrocities like that, and just comment on what you foresee the federal role being in trying to combat wherever you can and however you can what seems to be an increase in these mass shooter type events.
Sure. Well, I think that here's the frustrating part about this, and I actually spoke on this on the floor of the General Assembly back in March, and it was I was addressing some of the rhetoric that we were experiencing in the General Assembly. It was very frustrating because those of us who desperately want to keep our kids safe and desperately want to keep our schools safe, but also understand that we have a commitment to ensure that law-abiding citizens are able to protect themselves. We were being compared to, by many of my Democrat colleagues, we were being compared to Nazis, segregationists. It was just completely inappropriate. And so I gave a floor speech on this, and it ended up going viral. That was not my intent, but 40 million people saw it. And the thing that I was really trying to stress in that speech was that there are a number of things that we agree on, and we can have a civil debate over this issue. But the frustrating part for someone like me who does hold the Second Amendment in high esteem is that we agree on probably 9 of the 10 policy positions with respect to keeping our kids safer. So we agree that we want more school resource officers. We agree that we want more trauma-informed education for our teachers and our first responders. We agree that we want more mental health. We agree that we want federal, state, and local law enforcement to be able to cooperate better so that when somebody is identified as a potential threat, that communication doesn't get lost between multiple agencies that aren't speaking to one another. We agree on all those things. And unfortunately, we're not able to focus on the things that we agree on because there's a small group of people, it's not the entire Democratic Party, but there is a small group of Democrats that the only solution they will accept is one that I believe would deprive people of the fundamental ability to be able to defend themselves. And so if we can focus on the behavior and not the instrument, right? If you don't address the behavior and all you do is address the tool, then the behavior is still going to exist, and they're going to find a different tool. You may be able to take away a gun, or you might not. But if you pass gun control, that person just finds a vehicle, or maybe they make explosive device, or whatever it is. So we really have to focus on the behavior, and if we can focus our attention there, I think that is going to do the most to actually keep our kids safe without infringing on fundamental rights. And the good news is that we are seeing more Democrats cross over in the General Assembly. We're actually doing, for the first time in 150 years, we have a select committee in the House of Delegates that is specifically looking at this issue, not for the purpose of Richmond to tell localities what to do, but to basically establish best practices and then to share those throughout the Commonwealth, allow localities to make the decisions that work best for them. And I do think that's the correct approach. If the federal government comes in now and starts taking more money away from school districts only to try to impose one-size-fits-all solutions from the federal level, I actually think that's not only going to diminish our educational system, I don't think it's going to make us safer. So what we need to do is provide a clearinghouse where different schools can get the support that they need in order to set up best practices that they think will work best for their localities and address the specific issues there. But the last thing we want is for the federal government to soak up a bunch of money and then tell localities, well, you only get it if you do this or this. No, let's allow the localities to come up with solutions that work best for them. And then where appropriate at the federal and state level, we can provide assistance in making sure that those are implemented. But first things first, we need to stop using these tragedies as political footballs. And we need to focus on the things that both sides agree on because there's a lot. And let's hit those issues first. And then we can address some of the other issues that maybe we don't agree on as much, and we can have a civil debate on it. But as long as a select group on the left are going to use this tragedy or these series of tragedies as a way to simply talk about guns and not talk about the litany of other factors that involved, we're not going to make our kids safer by doing this, and it's going to continue to divide people over an issue where really there's a lot of unity if we could just focus on the correct issues and the ones that are going to do the most to keep our kids safe.
And I guess the last question I have is one of the actual responsibilities of the Senate is supposed to be to advise and consent on treaties with foreign countries. So where would you stand on what's going on recently with North Korea and Iran, with the way President Trump has handled those two situations?
Well, I have to tell you, the one thing I'm really impressed with the presidency is when you look at how President Trump has dealt with North Korea. He sent a very, very strong message that the United States military is going to be fully equipped, it's going to be fully funded, and that this president trusts the United States military execute its mission. Not only that, but again, both allies and enemies alike believe this president when he says he's going to do something. And that's critical, because without that kind of trust, you can't engage in negotiation. And so rather than dealing in this policy of isolation, which we've largely had, isolation and appeasement with North Korea, which has allowed that dictatorship to continue to oppress its people while threatening the world, we're now engaged, we're now in a strategy of engagement, which I think really does have a real chance. Now, again, I'm cautiously optimistic. I understand that Kim Jong-un is a dictator. I understand that China has played games right now with things like this, but I do think we have the right strategy in Korea going forward, and so I think that's wonderful. When it comes to things like the Iran nuclear deal, I'm sorry, engagement is a good idea, but only if you're actually engaging from a position of strength. And I fully believe that when Barack Obama signed that deal, first of all, it was not a properly ratified treaty. It was just an agreement, because it never went to the Senate for ratification. It was a horrible deal. It put us in a bad position. I think it put our allies in a bad position, our allies within the region. It put Israel in a bad position. And it gave Iran a lot of benefits without actually requiring them to do anything. I mean, we can talk all day long about how it was requiring them to shut down their nuclear arms program, but from a substantive level, it really wasn't achieving any of that. So I think pulling out of that treaty was the appropriate thing, or not treaty, but pulling out of that agreement was the appropriate thing to do. And now we can re-engage from a position of strength and let Iran know that if they're going to continue to fund terrorism, because I'll tell you what, when I served in Iraq in 2008 and I was operating in certain portions of Iraq, a lot of the militia, the terrorist elements over there, were getting all of their support from Iran. So now we have an opportunity to go back with a president that doesn't just draw lines in the sand and then back away from them. We get to go into this agreement now. We get to go into this negotiation now with a president that means what he says. Iran knows they're not going to be able to get away with the things that they were able to under the last administration. So we can once again re-engage and hopefully stabilize that region. But you have to go in with a position of strength, and you have to go in with your enemies and allies alike knowing that you mean what you say. And I think we have that for the first time in a long time now, and that puts us in a very good position to ensure peace through strength, and ensure that we have a foreign policy which is more focused on engagement through trade. It's more focused on cultural exchange, and that way we don't have to use our military in order to make sure we're safe. We can have the military there as a backstop in order to confront threats, but we can negotiate and exchange from a position of strength.
So I think that we've covered a lot of topics today, and I just want to give you the floor to maybe reiterate or to touch on anything that I may have glossed over that you think is important or that you want our listeners to hear.
Well, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. I think the three things that have really exemplified the way we're trying to run our campaign is, look, I'm not trying to attack Tim Kaine personally. I don't think he's a horrible person, but I think he's bought into a philosophy that's somewhat dangerous. And I've been all over the world, and I've seen how this plays out. And Tim Kaine really believes that if the government just has more power, more control at the federal level, then it'll take care of us. And I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. We're a nation of free people. There's three things that I really believe are the responsibility of the government. It's to protect our liberty. And your liberty is nothing more than your right to live your life the way you want, provided you don't infringe on the right of someone else to do the same. I don't want to tell you how to live your life. I don't think the federal government should try to tell you how to live your life. We believe in protecting the free market. And the free market is nothing more than your ability to go into the marketplace, share of your time, your talents, your idea, and your work ethic to benefit yourself, your family, your community. And quite frankly, your success in the economy should not be determined based off of your political connections. It should be determined based off of how good a job you go out there working and providing the products and services that your fellow citizens want. And then finally, the third thing that I'm very adamant about is equal justice before the law. I believe that God made us equal, and we should be viewed as equal when we walk into our courts. But unfortunately, we've seen it in the federal level. We've seen it all over through levels of government where they're constantly setting one set of rules for one group of people and another set of rules for another group of people. And I really think Hillary Clinton was a perfect example of this. I know as a veteran with a top secret security clearance, if I had done some of the things that Hillary Clinton had done, I'd be in jail. But somehow those with political connections get away with things that they really shouldn't. And so I think returning back to a true dedication to equal justice for the law is very important. So individual liberty, free markets and opportunity, and equal justice before the law is really what I'm running on, because I think regardless of where you go in the Commonwealth, that's a message that can resonate with everyone. And let's put the focus back on empowering people, not trying to set up numerous redundant government programs that are failing to live up to the results or live up to what they claim they'll achieve. So again, I really appreciate the time. I really look forward to getting out to Eastern Shore here in the next couple of weeks, and we'll see you then.
And the primary election for the Republican nomination to challenge Senator Tim Kaine is when?
June 12th. So please go out on June 12th. Early voting has already started. So if you're planning to be away or you're on a trip, you can actually go right into your registrar's office and vote right now. You can vote by absentee, although the deadline for that is getting pretty close. So please get out there and vote. Also, if you would like to, if you'd like to hear more about what we believe, what I've done in the General Assembly, the record that I'm running on, you can go to nick4senate.com. That's Nick, the number 4, Senate.com. Or you can follow us on Facebook. If you want to see that speech that I gave that went viral all over the country and really all over the world, that's on our website and our Facebook page. But please, don't just take my word for it. Check us out. Make sure that I've actually done what I've said I've done over the last 3 years, and that'll give you a good indication that I'll do it in the United States Senate.
Our guest today has been Delegate Nick Freitas. He's currently a candidate for the Republican nomination for the one of the 2 Virginia Senate seats for the federal government. Delegate Freitas, we appreciate your time this afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. All right, just a reminder that all candidates are welcome here on Shore Talk on WESR for this U.S. Senate race.
Thank you for listening to Shore Talk. This interview has been recorded and is available on WESR's YouTube page. To schedule a Shore Talk for your community event or organization, call us at 757-787-3200 or email Nancy at WESR.net.